President Trump is headed to China in 2 days. Now, according to the legacy media, President Trump is in a weak position. He has no cards to play. The Chinese have the upper hand. This is total crap. President Trump has spent a decade totally reshifting the global power map. China is in trouble, and President Trump is heading into the summit in a power position on every front. Go back 10 years. Everyone said that China would be dominant 10 years ago. Wrong. Well, today, America's critics, the left and the woke right, which is basically the new left, they say that America should cede global power to multipolarity, which means China and Russia. That's not just stupid. It makes them useful idiots for one of the world's worst regimes. President Trump has reshuffled the global order even more in America's favor. In a second, we'll get to the real story, how China is in serious trouble, how America is rising. Plus, we'll talk to the acting labor secretary about some new economic numbers. We'll get some pretty egregious jokes at the roast of Kevin Hart, and we will discuss whether indeed Elliot Page is playing Achilles in Christopher Nolan's new flick. And where did Ellen Page go? Why is she still missing? This is The Ben Shapiro Show. So as you know, this week, President Trump is headed to China to meet with the Chinese dictator Xi Jinping. According to Reuters, the president and Jinping are set to discuss Iran, Taiwan, artificial intelligence, and nuclear weapons as they weigh extending a critical mineral.
So just right off the bat, what stands out to me is that he said the Chinese dictator, but then many might argue that is Trump not a dictator? I know many have called him that already, especially considering all the antics recently. But I'll keep it going here. I just wanted to point that out.
Deal, according to U.S. officials who have been previewing Trump's 2-day visit to China this week. Now, according to some sources, China is actually overconfident. They believe that they have the upper hand. Zhang Huang, who is a global health expert specializing in China, wrote for the New York Times over the weekend. As Beijing prepares for President Trump's visit this week, I see a dangerous new overconfidence taking hold in my native country, based on misplaced notions of American decline. I fear it is fueling a sense of intransigence that is making Chinese leaders more willing to weaponize their nation's power and less likely to back down in future confrontations with the United States. The belief is partly a defense mechanism to help Chinese people cope with their own problems, a slowing economy, a collapsing property market, high unemployment, and a widespread sense of uncertainty. Now, again, one of the things that's happening here is that people in China are being allowed to see by the Chinese government coverage of what's happening in America. And because that coverage is very often negative about America, that is ramping up the Chinese government's perception of strength. It turns out that what we say to one another here in the United States has a massive outsized impact abroad. This is why you will see members of the woke right appearing on Iranian television in clips or on Russian television in clips. It is true that when you say things that are...
So just so that I make sure that I'm understanding Ben here, is he saying that things in America are like so great for like the average person? Or are we now in a competition of who has it worse? Because from what I'm understanding him say here, he's saying things are not all rosy in China, but they don't seem to have that on display. But I don't think that, like, even if things are not rosy in China, what does that have to do with us in America, right? Like we just want things to be better for us, really. And if it's America first, then why are you talking about China and how things are in China? Why does that bother us? Why is that any of our business? I guess is what I'm saying.
Untrue about the United States. And when you spread the idea that America is on her last legs, that's actually quite good for America's enemies. And as you can see, both China and Russia are trying to claim that the new status of planet Earth ought to be multipolarity. And what they mean by multipolarity is the same thing that is meant by Hassan Piker or Tucker Carlson. The idea is America must cede global power. So Vladimir Putin, who again is a war criminal, here he was suggesting that multipolarity must be based on the UN Charter.
So again, he's calling people names, right? He's saying Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. Yes, I agree. But I don't hear him calling DJT a war criminal. Or does that not work both ways as well? Because what is a war criminal? I guess that's the question.
The idea of the use of the UN Charter, which is paid for by the United States. We are the chief foundational lodestar of the United Nations. The idea that the UN ought to be a club in the hands of Russia and China is insane. Here was Putin at the Victory Day celebration.
The multipolar architecture of today must be based on the Charter of the United Nations Organization in its fullness and in its entirety. The security must be equal and indivisible, and cultural diversity and ethnic diversity of the planet must be taken into consideration, and the nations must have the right to determine their own future.
Okay, so again, the idea that Russia cares about nations determining their own future while they're attempting to destroy Ukraine wholesale is pretty astonishing. Meanwhile, they're buddies in the sort of Europe.
So again, that is kind of reach, right? Because he's saying Russia talking about people not being able to determine their own futures. And I agree. Russia shouldn't be in Ukraine. But then can't the same be said about the US and Israel in Iran right now? Why can't other people be allowed to also determine their own futures? Right? The same way Ukraine should be allowed to determine their futures, it's the same way other countries should be allowed to do the same. And so I'm kind of seeing a little bit of flip-flopping from Ben here, right? Because it appears that, and I don't want to jump to conclusions, but just putting out a question there for you guys. Do you think that Ben is a little bit biased now? Because we all know that he's pro-Israel, and it appears that DJT is really doing the job for Israel. So could it be that that is why Ben is speaking favorably about DJT? Let's talk about it in the chat, guys. I'm not sure. I'm just asking the questions, really. But I'm not making any allegations against Ben or anybody.
European/Canadian world are helping them out. Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, is calling for global cooperation based on common values and interests. Now, I'm just wondering what those common values and interests would be with, say, Russia and China, because he has been reorienting Canada away from the United States in the aftermath of the trade war with the U.S.
Exactly. So he had to do that, right? Like McCartney had to do something, because if you guys remember with DJT, it was always one day we're on tariffs, 100% tariffs. The next day we're talking, the next day tariffs. So you can't really partner with someone that is unreliable like that. So really, he's left Canada and their allies with no choice but to look for more reliable partners. And McCartney would be irresponsible not to do what he's doing right now, which is looking outside and trying to widen Canada's options. In my opinion, it was irresponsible for Canada to really put 80%, I believe it was, of their trades to be with one country. That was already irresponsible of them to begin with. So McCartney is doing the responsible thing here. And I think Ben would do the same as well. I don't think Ben would want to do business with someone like DJT who seems to be fairly volatile. Would you agree with me on that?
And toward China, here's Mark Carney, again, calling for a sort of multipolarity.
We're making this progress in part because we've recognized, in some cases before others, the degree to which in the new world sovereignty requires more than a country just being able to feed, fuel, and defend itself, as important as that is. It requires access to those critical minerals, to space-based communications, to sovereign cloud, AI, payment systems, clean energy, and vaccines. And all of that demands partnership. And there's no one-stop shop for that partnership. We need a variable geometry, a dense web of partnerships across those core strategic capabilities and issues, drawing on common values and interests, because it's those common values and interests that will assure alignment and respect to those agreements.
So many common values and interests with, say, China and Russia. That, of course, he was saying at the Center for American Progress, a liberal think tank outlet. Now, President Trump is headed over to China, and you're being told by our beloved legacy media that President Trump is somehow in a weak position. Multipolarity is happening. Wrong. China is in the weakest global position it has been in at least a couple of decades. Go back one decade.
Yeah, so not to say that Ben is wrong, but really, if China is the weaker party here, then why is DJT going to China? Why isn't it Xi Jinping coming to the US to meet with Trump? Some might ask that question, and they wouldn't be wrong to ask that. Right? So I'm just putting that out there. Like, it doesn't look like, and apparently when DJT even arrived in China, Xi wouldn't even meet him at the airport. He literally sent like some junior officials and some children to welcome the president of the United States, really. And I heard that now, like, he's already even seized from the whole making Taiwan their own country. He's already conceded that already to China. So really, I don't know what he's talking about here when he says that China is in the weaker position. I don't know that I agree with that. But let's talk about it in the chat, guys. Do you agree? Do you think that China is in the weaker position here?
To the Obama administration. So in September 2015, Obama and Xi Jinping had a joint event at the White House urging U.S.-China cooperation. Here is President Obama talking about China way back when.
So greater prosperity and greater security. That's what American and Chinese cooperation can deliver. And that's why I want to say again, the United States welcomes the rise of a China that is peaceful, stable, prosperous, and a responsible player in global affairs. And I'm committed to expanding our cooperation, even as we address disagreements candidly and constructively.
Now, again, the idea from Barack Obama was that China...
Yeah, I see a chat in the chat. Someone says no. Sleek Wheelie says no. So you mean no, China is not in a weaker position? Then I think I agree with you on that. I don't think China is in a weaker position either. Otherwise, Trump wouldn't be going to go see Xi. And I believe Putin is already scheduled as well to go see Xi as well. So it's looking more like China is in a really good spot right now, with the US fighting in Iran, tied up in Hormuz, and with Russia tied up in Ukraine. China seems to be like the only adult in the room, really. And I think why interrupt your enemy when they're making mistakes? I think that's the mode China is on right now. They just kind of let their enemies fail, and then they just pick up the remaining pieces.
China would be a global partner with us. We would work with them in the same way that he wanted Iran to be a global partner or Russia to be a global partner. And President Trump, you may remember when he was running back in 2016, his language with regard to China was a little different than that of Barack Obama. Here he was in 2016 running for president.
When the Chinese traders come in, and they come in 20 at a time, they come in all the way. But when the Chinese come in, and they want to make great trade deals, and they make the best trade deals, and not anymore. When I'm there, we turn it around, folks. We turn it around. We have a $500 billion deficit, trade deficit with China. We're going to turn it around, and we have the cards. Don't forget, we're like the piggy bank that's being robbed. We have the cards. We have a lot of power with China. When China doesn't want to fix the problem in North Korea, we say, sorry, folks, you got to fix the problem. Because we can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing.
I have to say, it is astonishing how well President Trump has held up. There are all of these before and after photos from every president where it shows.
Then I just wanted to point out really before we see Ben gushing over Trump, right? Is that like, do you guys, I did some research, and apparently back in 2016, Ben actually was siding with Hillary. Look it up. I looked it up. He actually was on the side of Hillary, on the Democratic side. Like, he didn't want Trump to win in 2016. So I wonder what has changed. Could it be that now Trump is doing the bidding of Israel, and we know that Ben loves Israel, right? I don't know. I'm just putting that out there, really. But now he's going to go on and talk about how great Trump looks. Now, some might argue that perhaps not really, right? We've seen him with some swollen ankles and some blotchy patches, and like, he's not a young man, so that's normal. He's not a young man for sure.
A president going into office, he looks all young and vibrant, and 8 years later, he looks as though death is upon him. President Trump is identical. He looks the same as he did in 2016. It's unbelievable. He's the only person in America who's not aging. In any case, things are not going amazing for China in the Trump era. See, here is the thing. China is an awful, terrible, autocratic, economically fascist one-party state. And they've had serious systemic problems for years, decades even. Now, those problems have been masked over the course of the last 3 decades or so by China's movement from a totally closed economy in the 1970s to an economy that actually engaged with world markets, that moved from communism at home into a sort of mercantilism under the predecessors to Xi Jinping, Jiang Zemin, and Hu Jintao. They actually moved from full-on communism toward, again, an embrace of global markets, even if their businesses were structured top-down in China. That growth itself masked China's massive internal problems. Now, there are always moronic economists here in the West who are in love with the idea of a mercantilist centralized state, meaning a centralized state that directs where private monies should be spent and then determines what kind of trade deals can be made. Everything is government sponsored. Everything is government subsidized. Everything is government regulated. And a lot of economists love this stuff because it gives them the illusion of control. And over the course of sort of capitalism versus mercantilism, there's always been a group of economists who sort of love this model. Back in the 1930s, there were economists in the United States who were very jealous of the Nazi German and Italian fascist models because they were capable of mobilizing on broad scale. Now, both those economies were very weak. One of the things that drove Germany toward war in the late 30s is the fact that they had driven up extraordinary foreign debt because they were spending all of their money on military industrial rebuilding. But again, it was true of the Soviet Union in the 1950s and 60s, this idea that the Soviet Union was going to bury us. And it's true now of China. But China is not the economic powerhouse we are making it out to be. Now, they can direct their economy in a few different directions with serious power. And they can take whatever they have of their economy and they can cobble.
I don't know anybody that is making China out to be like some major super military force, right? I don't know anyone that is doing that. I think there's no debate that America has the strongest army. I think what people are saying is that China, they're like the adults in the room and they are in a strategic position because they are not in any fights with anybody. Meanwhile, America seems to be the one that is in multiple battlegrounds, right? They are in multiple wars at the same time. And so China, they just seem to want to do business and not fight. And so I think that's what people are talking about. It's not really about that China is like, I think if China went up against the US, I don't know who would win that fight, but I don't think China would pick that fight. But let me know in the chat, guys, you think China would actually pick a fight with the United States? I doubt it. That would be like a bad move from them. And they know it too. Even Iran knows it too. That's why Iran, they're not trying to win against Israel and US. They just did a strategic move, which is waging economic warfare by blocking the Hormuz Straits. By the way, they said they would do it too. They said that they would do it too if this happened. And then the US and Israel still went on to do what they did. And Iran is following through on their promises. It's promises made and promises kept. You see?
It together and they can punch in one direction. So, for example, if they want to generate extraordinary levels of power, they can build lots of nuclear plants or they can dig for coal. And they don't care about the environmental effects. So they can really outproduce us in terms of energy, and they have been. Or they can build some new cars that are pretty competitive by stealing and adapting Western technology, which they do. But let us be real. The Chinese economy is not truly competitive with the American economy in any serious sense. Their products are not better than ours. Their services are not better than ours. Their economy is not better than ours. Not even close. Not even.
Yeah, and again, nobody's going to argue with you there. Like the US is like a superpower. No question there. It's just that now more people are going to prefer to do business with China than to do business with the unreliable, highly volatile Americans under the leadership of DJT. Right? You never know what he's going to do tomorrow. Right? He might say one thing today and then do the exact opposite tomorrow. And so people are going to move to work with someone that is more reliable. And that's just how I see it. Like people are going to do what's best for them. So, sorry. Oh, now would I want to live in China? Heck no. Heck no, I don't want to live in China because I know that like it's a dictatorship as well, right? Like Xi is there and like he really has his people very much trained. And actually the same DJT has actually lauded Xi for the way he has a control of his people. Look it up. DJT literally lauded Xi for how much control he has over his people. And he said that's why they're able to be so fast with their innovation is because they don't have as many protocols and bureaucracy that we do in the West. Yeah.
Close. Again, it is just a misnomer. The reality is that China's nominal GDP per capita, and it probably is lower than this, is like $15,000 a year. $15,000 a year. They have the same GDP per capita as Kazakhstan. The United States, our nominal GDP per capita, right? We're all suffering. It's just terrible. Our economies, we hear this all the time. Right now, our nominal GDP per capita is $95,000 a year.
Yeah, okay. You know what? So then If that's the case, then why do we have so many Americans crying about like the cost of groceries? I mean, why can't they just buy some groceries with their GDP? So, hey, Mr. Grocery Store, give me this groceries. I have a 90K GDP. You know, you're still going to need to pay from your own personal account. So I don't know why this guy is talking the way he's talking, right? Like America is like a highly capitalistic system, which is fine. But you have like the most amount of billionaires, you know? So it's kind of like it's very top heavy. Right? Like, I don't know if I got that right, but we have like a very few percentage of people that are really making all the money. And then the rest of the people are kind of just making it through, really scraping by.
The average American, right? If you just take the GDP and divide it by the number of Americans, our economy is like 7 times the size of the Chinese economy on a per capita basis. Their growth rates are always lies. They're always exaggerated. All right, coming up, we'll get to all the reasons why China has serious systemic problems. First, at some point, Americans collectively decided paying $80 or $90 a month for wireless service was kind of normal. Why? Seriously, like why? Your phone bill now looks like a car payment because 3 giant companies figured out they could keep raising prices and most people would never bother switching. Meanwhile, Pure Talk is offering unlimited high-speed data for $34.99 a month. That's not an strong call Clarity as a company today. A couple of years ago, at the very top, the fewest will be elderly. Even in 2000, the warning signs were clear in China. You can see the dramatic lack of people in the 9 and below group. That did not change. So here's what that same chart looks like by 2020. Look how the vast bulk of the population is now over the age of 30. According to the Chinese government itself, the one-child policy prevented 400 million births. China's population has already peaked. It's now dropping. The question is, as the population ages in a heavily Marxist system, who's going to pay the bills? Again, if you'd listened a couple of years ago, you'd be ahead of the curve, which is usually true of this show. Okay, reason number 2, that the Chinese economy is a problem, that it is not, in fact, totally competitive, is they lack innovation. So they can build these gigantic labs and they can force a bunch of people into those labs. But when you don't have free markets, the system of free markets allows for better products and services because of competition. You want to know why every major AI company is located in the United States? Because they're all competing with each other. In fact, many of them are located a few blocks from one another in Silicon Valley. And that is not atypical in a free market economy. Because you have a business.
So it's one thing to talk about free market economy, but does anybody remember Huawei? I don't forgive my pronunciation, but Huawei, right? And people have already alleged that the United States potentially banned Huawei from the US because China was actually winning the 5G race. And now the US, they claim that, oh, well, they banned them because of like they did some IP thefts and they had like some data security issues that they were worried about, so they banned it. But some people are also arguing that maybe they were just trying to stop China in the 5G race. So if America is so super intelligent and everything, then why do they need to tie the hands of China? Why can't they just have an open market, fair competition? Why is it that just now we're now actually allowing Chinese EVs into some parts of America, right? Where before we weren't allowing it. So the Tesla was just dominating the whole markets and the GMs, right? But now they're opening up the markets to China. Why can't you make it a fair, open market if you know that you're so much more intelligent than the Chinese? And look, I'm not here trying to defend China. I would not want to live in China, don't get me wrong, but we just giving like the opposing arguments as well, you know?
Business starts off. It starts making a profit. Another business says, I can do that better, and they jump in. But what if the state decides which businesses should win and which ones should lose? As I said, again, in that video a couple of years ago, innovation is not the chief part of the Chinese economy. Instead, it's just ramming things through, producing things at bulk. Right now, the entire Chinese economy is reliant on producing things at scale, undercutting foreign markets, and stealing technology. As the young working population declines, producing things at scale becomes a lot more difficult. Cheap labor goes away. Then there's the problem of innovation. It turns out when you nationalize all innovation, you kill it. The solution is you rob everybody else of their IP, and then you try to recreate it. Some reports suggest that Chinese IP theft cost the United States alone up to $600 billion per year. And again, that's what they did with DeepSeek. They
So
basically
imagine,
robbed
like,
a bunch.
just imagine accusing a country. Imagine accusing China of doing IP theft. Meanwhile, the US just casually walked in to Venezuela, picked up their president, and now controls the world's largest oil reserves as a result of that. What theft is greater than that? But let's just pretend like as if, they can do no wrong, right? But what kind of theft? Oh, is that not theft? Oh, yeah, that's right. All the opioids and all the drugs were coming through Venezuela, so that's why they really had to stop them. But how do you explain now taking control of their whole oil? And then you talk about a nation being able to be self-determined, to determine their own fate. But then you snatch their president, and then you want to do a regime change there and put someone that is more friendly towards the US. So, I mean, like, I think a lot of people are waking up to the hypocrisy as well. And I think Ben himself probably knows this, but he can't say it because I think now he's being a little bit biased, as you already know, because of DJT's stance and the way DJT is willing to help Israel and fight their battles for them with the American taxpayers' money, of course. That war apparently is 1 billion, a Bailey a day to keep up that war, by the way.
Bunch of IP from the United States, and they tried to get chips they weren't allowed access to and hooked those all up. Does that mean they could outcompete us in a true competitive market? The answer is no. Reason number 3 that China has a problem is everybody pretends that China doesn't have a serious debt problem. They hide their debt problem by stealing money from their citizens. China has a massive debt problem. Again, this is from my video a couple of years ago explaining. The country's debt to GDP ratio is at least 159%. That is 60% higher than the global rate, according to the S&P Global Ratings. The nation's total stock of corporate, household, and government debt is now over 300% of GDP. It comprises 15% of all debt globally, according to the Institute of International Finance. Because Chinese banks are owned by the state, their decision-making is rooted in government interests rather than profitability. That means they're probably carrying trillions of dollars in bad loans. Okay, reason number 4, they got a problem. We're always hearing about the Chinese military. And yes, of course, they have a gigantic nuclear arsenal.
So hold on. I have to also ask as well, right? Because, okay, so China has a lot of debts, but I believe that the US also has a lot of debts. And apparently some would even argue that it's only because the US have the world reserve currency that is what actually allows them to be able to carry so much debt without the same impact that other countries would face. Right? But what happens if they ever lose that status? There could be trouble in paradise after all. Right? So I'm just saying that like he's pointing fingers at another country and then he has like 3 pointing right back at him.
But technologically speaking, they are way behind the United States. Now, maybe they're able to pick it up, but not if they're also lagging in AI. This is why we need to win the AI race. Because basically the only thing that can solve Chinese demographic problems, productivity problems, and military problems is winning the AI race. This is why it's so stupid when you see people from the left to the woke right making the case that AI in the United States needs to be set back. It's nuts. That's crazy. You're handing global power to the Chinese.
It's not. I don't think anybody's saying AI needs to be set back, right? Like it's that we can see that AI is already. It needs to be governed. I think that's the main concern. Most people I know, they're using AI in their day-to-day lives at this point. So I love AI, right? But it needs to be governed and regulated, right? Like because now you can't just like all of a sudden let go of a whole department because of AI. Right? Like it's supposed to help us to be better. I don't think it's supposed to replace us. And then not to mention apparently like the hundreds of data centers being built and like tearing up like the nature and whatnot to put more data centers everywhere. Right? So I think that's where people have a problem with it. And I'm sure in China they don't have these kind of problems because it's a dictatorship, right? So they can just probably do whatever they want.
About China's gigantic army. Well, they got some problems. Again, here's from my video. China's 2 million man army is indeed huge, but manpower isn't everything, as we saw in the Ukraine war. Like Russia, the Chinese military isn't up to snuff. China relies on older, less sophisticated ships, according to the Rand Corporation. What's more, China doesn't yet have the capacity to project deep water power. They have a lot of boats in their navy, and their navy is effective in coastal zones, but they have no capacity to project power beyond those zones. So the Chinese Navy is largely a brown water navy, meaning internal waterways, or a green water navy, meaning the Taiwan Strait's immediate areas right off their coast. They do not have a serious blue water navy, meaning they can't project power all the way to, say, the Strait of Hormuz in any really serious way. And then finally, of course, China's entire governmental system is...
So does he mean like project power like the same way the U.S. are projecting power right now with their blockade? I mean, how's that working for them? That is one question I have. And then the other question I have is, why would China need to project strength at the Strait of Hormuz? You know, like they're allied with Iran. So Iran lets them go through anyways. Like, that's the point. They're diplomatic and they're able to get what they want without having to resort to throwing blows. That's how I see it. There's no need for them to be projecting strength in someone else's backyard.
Built around lack of competition. It is built around being closed to ideas. And you'll always see, there are always a class of morons who will claim that centralized control, whether economically or politically, is better. Thomas Friedman, of course, is one of these people. Here is the problem with Chinese centralized control. It turns out that you can't get innovation, you can't get building, you can't get the thriving, you can't get any of it. Again, here's from that video a couple of years ago, which if you'd watched it a couple of years ago, you'd be pretty well informed as to what's happening. While fools like Thomas Friedman of the New York Times write that, quote, China's one-party autocracy can impose the important policies needed to move a society forward, the reality is the reverse. Because the dictatorship is the be-all end-all, it can't allow the freedom and innovation necessary to grow the country and fix its problem. So here's the thing. President Trump knows all of this, and he has been spending the last 10 years putting the screws to China. It is the through line on his foreign policy. People look at Trump's foreign policy. Say, what's he doing in Iran? I don't understand. What's he doing in Venezuela? I don't understand. What's he doing with regard to Japan? I don't know.
We definitely know. We definitely know what he's doing in Venezuela, right? He snatched up their oil. That's what he's doing in Venezuela, and we know what he's doing in Iran. Or at least we can make some guesses as to what he's doing in Iran, right? He's there to support Israel. Yeah, I think people are seeing it, right? Like, so there's a reason why he's doing what he's doing. We don't necessarily always agree with it, but we can see the reasons. At least we can speculate the reasons.
All of this is oriented at China. All of it. Now, President Trump is opportunistic in foreign policy terms. He waits for an opportunity to arise, and then he takes advantage of it. But let us be clear. Venezuela represented between 4 and 5% of total Chinese oil imports before we captured Nicolas Maduro. That is now down to basically zero. And not only that, Venezuela acted as a go-between for China and Iran. They don't anymore. In 2023, 10 to 15% of Chinese entire oil supply came from Iran. Guess what they are not getting now? Any of that. Saudi Arabia provides something like 14 to 15% of oil to China. That is why China has been trying to woo Saudi Arabia. But is that going to be successful? Well, they've alienated the UAE.
So
the UAE provides 6 to 7% of their...
So what is Ben saying here? What is Ben saying here? Is he saying that the reason for why DJT is doing what he's doing in the Middle East is to disrupt the flow of oil to China, to cripple them? And then he's talking about like a fair open market competition, but then you're trying to cripple your competition. Why? Why are you trying to cripple China? Like, why not work with other countries? That's what I don't get. Why can't we all coexist together? Why does there need to be China bad, America bad? Why not everybody work together to do business? Why all this? Yeah, let me know down in the chat. Maybe I'm being too naive, right? Maybe I'm being idealistic. So correct me, I've been known to be idealistic.
Total oil supply, and UAE, contra Saudi, is moving away from China. UAE is moving toward America. UAE is moving toward Israel. UAE, by the way, being far smarter in their approach to foreign policy than Saudi right now. Saudi is trying to split the baby, being half American, half Chinese. It's not going to work. UAE already broke from OPEC People missed what a huge development this is. OPEC, which again was a gigantic cartel designed to restrict oil supply coming from the Middle East. UAE, Saudi, they were all a part of it. UAE said, no, we're not doing that anymore. We're now going to produce oil how we want to produce oil. And they're going to take those oil winnings and they're going to invest them in tech, in military, industrial, in cooperation with Israel rather than opposition to Israel. If Saudi goes the way of China, they will be on the wrong side of this particular battle. Now, a lot has changed. Democrats today even concede that China is a geopolitical opponent of the United States. This has become a pretty bipartisan issue. And the effect on China has been, again, very, very, very bad. Their nominal GDP is 15.
It just looks to me like as if the U.S., just from the outside looking in, it looks like the U.S. might be threatened by China. While thumping their chest and being like, I'm the biggest, baddest bully in the park, in the schoolyard, the biggest schoolyard bully. But then you're still threatened by this small, nerdy-looking person. Why? Well, why be so threatened by them then? Why are you trying to cut off their oil supply? If you're like so much better than them in innovation, in tech, in military, then why do you need to disrupt them? Why do you need to cripple them? Why not just let it be like a fair competition? Open it up and then let's see who the better person is, right? That's what I would say. That's what I would say. Unless, of course, you're trying to have like dominance over the whole world, in which that's fine. But I just don't know that that's what the people of America needs, right? Like people just want to be able to afford. And this is what DJT promised them was, you're going to have like cheaper groceries. We're going to bring down inflation. We're going to like, it's the golden age. We'll be the hottest country. We're the hottest country. So we went from that to now we're going to try and cripple China, stop their flow of oil. That he didn't run on any of these. So this is an absolute bait and switch, right?
$1,000 per capita. That is way behind the United States. Way, way, way behind the United States. They've even been having to abandon some of their biggest initiatives. So you remember a dozen years ago, they were talking about this thing called Belt and Road. This is their big thing, Belt and Road. Belt and Road was an initiative, or what they called the Silk Road Initiative. It was designed to basically create massive debt traps for countries. They would give them free money. The money was not free. It would be attached to constraints. Those countries which were poor would take the loans, and then Beijing would basically foreclose on the loans and take control of property in strategic areas and all the rest. And countries were joining up because, hey, free money. But it turns out that countries have been leaving the Belt and Road Initiative. And even Chinese investment in Belt and Road has been dropping pretty precipitously. According to the Institute of International Studies in Australia, Panama, Italy, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, all of them have been moving away from the Belt and Road Initiative. According to that institute, Panama's withdrawal exemplifies this dynamic following U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's visit and warnings regarding Chinese influence over the Panama Canal. Panama chose not to renew its memorandum of understanding with the Belt and Road Initiative, a decision celebrated by Washington. According to Foundation for Defense of Democracy, China has quietly begun to pull the plug on BRI infrastructure spending. China's overseas development financing shrunk from a high of more than $80 billion in new funding in 2016 to around $5 billion in 2021. In Africa, the numbers are particularly stark. They dropped from $30 billion in 2016 to $1 billion last year. And again, a huge part of this also is because China totally screwed all of planet Earth with the COVID pandemic. Already coming up, President Trump is going to be discussing a wide variety of issues with Xi Jinping.
All right, so I'm just going to add one thing here, right, about the COVID thing, right? I don't know if you guys follow that, but I follow that. And from what I heard about COVID, it actually started in America. And actually, what's his name? Mr. Fauci. Mr. Fauci is actually being investigated as well, right? Because of the fact that he might have been illegally conducting gain of functions research. This video is probably not going to make it very far because I've said that. But apparently, if you don't know about the gain of functions research, it's something that you should look up. Apparently, the US actually were very much involved in funding this COVID, like the COVID that you know, they were very much involved in funding that whole research, even in moving it over to the Wuhan lab. They had emails with Tony Fauci talking about that, actually. But this might just be a conspiracy theory, of course. Like, what do I know, guys? Anyways, Opinions, thoughts, concerns, leave them in the chat. Also, if you enjoy the stream, be sure to give the video a like. Consider subscribing to the channel. Help us get to 1,000 subscribers. And I'll see you on the next one. Peace.